All right, what's up, basketballers? What I want to do today is I want to go over a little bit of how to get ready or how to shoot a basketball and the setup that you should be looking for when it comes down to your stance. You know, a lot of younger kids that I coach, you know, they have their elbows flared out, or they're doing chest passes, or they're just forcing the ball up. And while that might be a good throw, it's not exactly a basketball shot, okay? So the very first thing, when we see a basketball, you know, the first thing that we want to do is we do want to understand where the center of the ball is, because for a nice visual that you may imagine is seeing the ball rotate along that middle axis, okay? And a lot of that has to do with the way that our wrist and our fingers flick the ball in terms of creating that rotation, right? Now the basis of that, you got to understand, comes down to the way you set the ball up in your hands. So the first thing that I like to look for is to look for that air hole, right? And that helps you find the center of the basketball, where you can put your two fingers around it and use those two fingers to find that seam of the basketball so you have some extra grip, okay? Now what you'll see with my hand too here is that I'm spreading my hands out as wide as I can. If I keep them smaller and inside, I can lose the ball very easily. But if I keep my hands wide, that creates the grip for the basketball, and it's a little bit easier to palm in. Now, what we're looking for here is this 90-degree angle, right? You can think of it as going straight up, and this one's flat. And then the wrist up here should be flat as well, okay? So that should be your main shooting position in terms of the angles and the setup with your hand. Now, what else we need to understand is that we don't really generate too much power standing straight up. We need to get a little bit lower and be able to generate power from below, right? Actually, it's a misconception that the power comes from our legs, maybe when we're younger, but as we get older, we want to try to generate that power actually from our core and from our hips to be able to push the ball up. Okay. Now, the shooting motion, you know, we can sit here and we can practice shooting the basketball straight up and down like this, but it's not a very good, realistic, you know, real life basketball situation. What we do have to work on is also understanding that getting into our triple threat position is just as important. Now, what's important in our triple threat position is that you can imagine right here in the video, like you think of my zipper, is right down the very middle of this video, okay? And what we want to understand is we want our elbow, our wrist, and our eye all along that line. And then on our lower half, we have our hip, we have our knee, and we have our toe that all align up in a straight line. So if you were to freeze this and take a screenshot, you should be able to draw a straight line up and down that centers my balance, centers my energy while I shoot the ball, okay? So one very important thing to understand is going from here to here, here to here, we wanna make sure that our elbow gets tucked behind us. If we don't tuck our elbow, it's very easy to do what they like to call a pull shot, where the wrist is the last one to flex. And what it does is it brings the ball away from us before we get set. A more efficient ball pathway is actually being able to stick our elbows a little further back so that when we swing the ball forward, it's actually just going upward when you see this. Do you see that? And that way we have a fluid shot path, or a one-shot motion that is more likely to translate our energy the way that we want to. So what would you want to do in terms of practice getting to your triple threat position and practicing getting that shot fake or getting the ball up? Once we get up there, it should be a fluid motion with that rotation of the ball, and you should be able to see it depending on the basketball that you have. For example, I've got this smiley face basketball. You'll be able to see the rotation of that basketball. Okay? Now this left hand just goes along there to guide the basketball straight up and down, right? You can think of it as keeping that ball on a straight pathway. Now, let's go over closer to the basket so I can go over the next step. All right, so our next step is now we're right next to the basket. Now we have a hoop to shoot on. I'm gonna use this basketball so you can see the rotation. The black and yellow really give that visual that I'm looking for. So we're gonna go and we're gonna get set up, fingers around that air hole. We're gonna make sure that we're centered with that line right along the mid side of that. Now here's the thing. A lot of us were taught 10 toes square to the basket, but there's actually been some research that shows a little bit of an angle and a little bit of a slanted stance actually allows you to relieve some of the tensions that exist within your shoulder and within a part of your posterior chain that gets pulled as well. So for me, I was taught 10 toes to the basket, but I've also noticed that that causes my hand to go over to the side a little more. So by turning just a little bit, having that foot turned toward the basket, a 30, almost a 45-degree angle allows me to reach and allows my follow through to have less tension within it, okay? So we're gonna go ahead, set up our shot right here, get into our position. What you can do is start down here, bring the ball up, and then release, okay? What we're gonna be aiming for right now is we're gonna be aiming for right over the top of the front rim, right? We wanna make sure that we go for a swish. And again, the idea as you're practicing is making sure that the ball goes straight. You don't want any variation left to right. You want to go straight at the basket. Long and short, we can adjust for. But left and right are the biggest mistakes and ultimately the biggest margins of errors that cause us to miss the shot, okay? So from here, bringing from the bottom here, keeping our elbow tucked and up, okay? Now you see there, I just barely tapped the side of the basket, or the side of the rim, so we're gonna make sure we go again, and make sure we go for a swish. That one still hit the front. There we go, okay? Now you have two variations. You have the first variation where we go one-handed up and do a one-handed shot. Okay, that was too far. One-handed shot, keeping the ball close, or two-handed with the guide hand type of shot, okay? The goal here is to aim and get your muscle memory to be able to do this over and over and over again, so that as we start to move further and further back, we can adjust and add a little bit more power each time as we scoot further and further, okay? All right, and here's the last visual I wanted to give you, because this one's right underneath the basket, and therefore you can kind of see, and I can freeze frame my toes. You see how they're a little bit, angled, not straight at you, but angled. I've got my knee above my toe, my hip is within line as well, my shoulder, my elbow, and my wrist. My eye is also, for me, I'm aiming with my right eye. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But in order to go up and shoot, we should be able to keep those in line so that our energy is generated straight up. We're gonna try to avoid the front of that rim and aim for those perfect swishes each time. Right? Sometimes you'll tap the back or the front, or maybe it might bounce around, but again, we're working on that muscle memory. So as we continue to go up, we can repeat the same motion over and over again. All right, so an idea too as well, if you want to think of it, if I'm right in front of these two fingers are aiming to throw the ball into and kind of help guide that straight pathway toward the basket. That makes sense? So that elbow or that arm staying straight, my shoulder being there, and shooting in that direction, we're using these two fingers to actually guide toward that basket and keeping that straight shot pathway. Now, at the end of that, what I also want to point out is that there are good misses and there are bad misses. What does that mean? A good miss is that you have the shot, it went straight, it was an open shot, you had a good look at the basket, and if anything, it maybe rattled out, maybe bounced just on the back rim, but was actually quite close to going in. A bad miss would be one where none of your mechanics are set. The ball maybe went left or right, super long or super short, or just completely missed and was not a good probability shot. At the end of the day, you want to understand basketball is a team game, especially on the 5-on-5, and you're looking for a solid group or solid team shot. A lot of younger players worry about getting their own personal shot, but that's not as important as you get older. It's important that the team gets something efficient, gets something with a high probability, something that can actually help you guys win the game. So understanding that, getting your own mechanics in place, making sure that we don't have elbows sticking out, your wrist flaring out, or shooting off of the wrong fingers, etc. Having the right mechanics increases that efficiency, increases the probability of you actually hitting this shot, okay? Now, what's actually kind of interesting that you might have noticed, or if you've been following me for a bit, is that my own personal shot was one where I started to analyze with video and started to understand my own the intricacies of my own shot. I've been playing since I was very, very little, and when I didn't quite have the strength to get the basketball to the basket. And so in doing so, I learned certain compensation behaviors in terms of, throwing the ball from when I was younger. And as a result, my elbow used to stick out quite a bit. And also as another result of the way that I used to shoot and the way that it translated or started to evolve over the years, was as much as I tried to keep my left hand as a guide hand, it oftentimes has a bit of a thumb flick, in which my natural motion and then muscle memory in which I shoot a basketball keeps my left hand, the way you flicking or throwing the ball with my left hand in a sense as well. Now, when you go into slow motion situations and really analyze what's going on, my left hand actually doesn't have too much an effect on the basketball because it's actually being moved away from the basketball before it even shoots. However, it does decrease my efficiency simply because I no longer have the guidance of that guide hand at those moments and being able to keep that shot straight from that point on. So, the technique that you have behind your own shot very likely can lead into whether or not you're going to be efficient. There is the right way of approaching a shot in terms of the way that physics is designed, and then there's the repetition and that any motion that we practice or any motion that that we continue to repeat, any repeatable motion can be solidified, can be repeatable and completely and very precise just as well. But it does not necessarily mean that you have the advantages of the physics and the physical world on your side. It is ultimately just a result of deliberate practice and continued practice. So, there is a way in terms of, if you want to have an efficient, a pretty looking shot, one that is designed to operate in the world that we live in, you want to have the right physics behind what you're trying to do. But it's not to say that somebody can't go and shoot a shot like a chest pass, like a little kid does when they're trying to heave the ball toward the basket. It's not to say that can't be repeatable and that can't be accurate. It's just the fact that against the rules of physics, it's going to be less efficient until that person practices it to the point where they can't make mistakes in the motion anymore, okay? But at the end of the day, as you move further and further away from the basket, any minute angle changes left and right start to become amplified further and further as the ball travels. So, if Steph Curry's shot has a variation of just 0.1 or 0.2 degrees left and right versus somebody who might have 0.3 or 0.4, that can be a very drastic difference in their accuracy as you move further and further away from the basket. Either way, I want to know what you guys think. I want to know what you've learned about your shot or learned about how to shoot a basketball. Little tips maybe you've learned or little sayings that you have. Because again, I am coaching basketball and I'd love to hear what you guys have learned and things that maybe I can also implement in terms of sayings or visualizations or explanations that help my students and help my players learn to be better basketball players. So that's why I'm putting these things out, in order for everybody to get better and for everybody to learn And hopefully what I've been doing in terms of my side of learning about basketball is I can help compile a bunch of this information so that maybe you can analyze it a little bit better for yourself, or you can simply open up a conversation and become a better basketball player by understanding the game from a different perspective that maybe I can offer. All right. Hope that helped you guys. Keep playing basketball. We'll chat again soon.